Todd and Jessica with the Empowered Nurse coming at you today with a conversation that is for two groups of people. Number one, the next generation of nurses, whether you're a nursing student, a new grad, or a nurse who's been in the field for about 3 years. This is for you. But it's also for those older, more seasoned nurses who are either leading the new generation or mentoring the new generation. And this conversation comes from my perspective of having the absolute joy and honor of being a direct mentor at bedside to the new nurses that are coming into the emergency room department. Like, I get to see firsthand the difference between 20 years of experience and coming from a time when we still had paper charting to inviting in these new nurses who have a desire to serve the profession, who know nothing other than computer charting. And what I find is that there is more times a clash than there is a collaboration within that relationship. And what I know is that the next generation of nursing is calling nursing into a new era. My friends, if you have been in the profession for a long time, you probably already know and maybe haven't said out loud that the way that we used to do nursing is dying. And the death started with the introduction of the EMR and the corporatizing of healthcare that started focusing on throughput metrics and the insurance reimbursements. So we know that there was a huge shift in healthcare when those things came into play. And what I think is really cool is that us as mentors who have a lot of experience and came from the old school, right, of nursing, have a huge opportunity to pass on some really incredible tried and true skills to the next generation. But the next generation also has an opportunity to step into healthcare with new, fresh eyes and with already being super empowered with technology and teach us the new way of nursing. And I think that this is a great conversation, and we invite you to join because it's something that Todd and I are still exploring. And we sort of have three ways that the next generation of nursing and the old school nurses can form a freaking powerful relationship and usher in a new, more empowered generation of nurses. What do you think, Todd?
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's really interesting because I have written some articles that talk about, the system, right? And it seems like a lot of nurses, and I don't want to say this in any negative way. We're like, oh, we got to do this. We got to take this on. It's a physician led, it's the system. And it is. There's a ton of the systemic issues that are causing problems and challenges because nursing inherently is not a revenue driver in the system, right? So you take that into consideration. But when we're looking at the newer nurses, they're coming in, and me being almost a 30-year-old nurse, like I'm not 30 years old, I've been nursing for 30 years. Like, you take it to, like, from the generation, they're like, oh my God, this younger generation. We come in with this mindset of like, hey, we know, right? And we know, and we got to tell them, but we're also bringing the I think the systemic trauma that we felt as nurses that are really starting to come out now. Like, one of the things I'm passionate about is just having this conversation is about this dichotomy between in nursing where we have this self-sacrifice, like we overly self-sacrifice. And then there's this other side of self-care. And we're trying to either over boundary it and like, oh, let's go all the way over here, or we need to learn. And I think the newer nurses could teach us a little bit because they may swing in one way or another. And this is actually causing a little bit of a fracture in the nursing world right now, I believe, like, because they're coming in like, oh no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to work weekends. No, I need that day off. Or there's a little snow on the ground, I can't come in. Like that, like basic stuff. Like, we're like, you get in, you do what you got to do, right? Like, these are the things that, like, when you're caring for people's lives, you have to do. And I know we're going to go through a lot, and I covered some of the examples here, but man, I'm super passionate about this for sure.
Mm-hmm. Well, I love that you use the word fractured because I think in general we think of fractured as a negative thing. But I
Mhm.
would totally challenge that perspective. And I would say that the way nursing has been has to be fractured in order for us to create a truly empowered profession moving forward. And I
And
think
heal.
being fractured is a good thing. And we promised you would talk about sort of three ways that the old school and the next gen can really lock hands and work together. And the first one is having hard conversations. And I think the biggest mistake that we make is we get into our own personal triggers. Hey, Shelly, whoop whoop, Shelly Hank in the house. I know she knows a little bit about this. She's been a nurse for a long time too.
Hey,
um yeah, Shelly's awesome. But the old school nurses, we definitely come from a generation where we subscribed to eating our young, and we've probably been victims of older nurses eating their young. And what I mean by that is these older nurses are just freaking brutal. Like they are crusty. They share things in ways that are designed to just absolutely tear you down and break you apart. And that is not the way to have hard conversations. So, this is a call to us as the old school nurses to learn how to have hard conversations and stop calling out the next gen, but start calling them up. And that comes from a true desire to see them grow, to see them succeed, and a true desire to say, hey, I want to leave nursing better than when I came. And I recognize that it's my responsibility to pass the baton. So if I'm passing the baton in a way that's tearing them down, guess who's going to be caring for me when I'm old? Those nurses that I just tore down, right?
Yeah, and for somebody who entered the healthcare system 4 years ago and seeing nurses that were old enough to be my daughter, I'm like, "Oh, man," and I think I love what you said because one of the things that I find, and they've been talking about this for years in the nursing about eating their young, right? And I've been really passionate about this because I inherently don't feel that nurses want to do this, right? I don't feel like, hey, but I feel like it's a result of, and I wrote this in this article, of this resistance, and it's this inner resistance brought up by trauma, and it creates us like just reacting out of these emotions and all this stuff that comes up and all this stuff that's working hard. And I think one of the things that I've implored in myself and I talk to people about is like just starting to own it in ourselves, our own challenges, our own weaknesses, and in this part allows us to see that in them or somebody else. Like I teach this pretty in depth, and Jess, we've talked about this, like just coming with love in our heart and just like, hey, how can I step alongside this person and communicate in a way that they may understand something that I'm trying to teach them? I don't know if that makes sense.
Totally, totally. Well, and I think also having the hard conversations means that as a new nurse, number one, be willing to take feedback with the belief that your mentor wants you to be successful rather than showing up and being like, wow, this is a really hard conversation. I feel attacked. Right. So it comes with that common understanding of like, I care about you and I want you to succeed. And oh, my mentor wants me to succeed. Right. So if we start the conversation on that common ground, I think we have a lot more opportunity to really say the hard things from a place of like, how do we support the growth of the profession? Right. And there are two books that I could recommend. The first is Crucial Conversations. And of course, I don't remember the author right off the top of my head. But then the second one is actually a parenting book. It's Loving Your Kids on Purpose from Danny Silk. And it literally talks about how to have conversations, hard conversations with your children in ways that empower them. And I learned so much about that book that I can bring into the profession as I'm having these hard conversations. The second thing that we could offer is being willing to be open to one another. You know, Todd and I, we've talked a lot about that desire and that attachment to be right
Mm,
versus being open. And there's a total difference. And I had to give a new grad some really hard feedback and have a tough conversation that left her feeling pretty emotional. And I was so proud of her because she stood in that conversation receiving that feedback. And she came back the next shift, like really embracing my true passion for her to be successful. And it was really cool to see. And I ended the conversation with like, this relationship is a two-way street. And if there's anything that I can be doing better for you as your mentor, I'm open to hearing your feedback. And I think that when we can be open and willing to truly hear one another, that's when we become unstoppable in terms of like shifting the tide of how nursing is viewed and how we join together as a team. Like, my friends, we have all the power in our hot little hands if we choose to rise up and really leverage it in ways that call each other up.
Yeah, I love what you shared about, this need to be right. I focus a lot with people on that, and myself, my journey. It's like we think we know, and oftentimes, quote unquote, we know, but being open and curious just to exploring what people are thinking and what's going on, and really being able to step into that and have the hard conversations. Because let's be real, like nursing's hard, healthcare's hard, life is hard.
Yes.
Life is hard, right? Like, so I think sometimes, and this is coming from me and being authentic about it is, and I talk to the kids in my life. I said, listen, life's hard. When you get used to that, you could start to be really unstoppable. And I think that, some have had it maybe a little easier than others. And so they may need to learn how to go through the hard. And I love that example you shared because she was open. The growth is on the other side of going through the hard and sticking it out and not quitting. Not quitting.
Totally.
Don't quit.
Totally. That part. What was really cool is she had shared her heart with me. She was like, the reason I chose ER is because I wanted to challenge myself. I was like, that's freaking amazing. Are you feeling challenged right now? And she said, yes. And I was like, well, look at how freaking powerful you are. Like, you're getting exactly what you asked for. Right. So it was just a really cool experience. And, the third thing that I would say, and this is really a call to the older nurses, and yes, Shelly, I am the older nurse now, and that's really freaking weird for me. I just gotta say, like, I don't feel old enough to say that I'm the old nurse, right? But what I would say is this is a call out to the mentors and to the leaders. Take the time to show the nurses those tried and true old school tips and tricks at the bedside, like with IVs, with Foleys, with NG tubes, with those procedures that you don't get in school and that do actually take time for you to pause and to explain. Because it's those old school things that I learned from mentors who are willing to like pause the hustle of the busyness and really show me just those little tiny modifications in the way that I was doing things that made a huge difference in my confidence, in my skills, in my efficiency. And I think that nursing has become such a big business that we're just pumping people through a system that we lose sight of the fact that like we absolutely have to pause and teach our new nurses how to do these things better if their skills are going to have a chance for the future. And the new nurses, what I have found, are hungry to learn those things.
Yeah, it kind of wraps a bow on this, and what you were saying is like they're hungry to learn, and we have to just figure out a way to communicate because our ways of communicating sometimes are a little bit from, hey, our need to be right. One of the things that I found in my own journey is just having that ability to be curious and start to step into ourselves. Like, what do we need inside that's causing this rift, that's creating this like, hey, you could come from a spot of like, you should know this already. Like, you need to know this. Like, we come at this from this intensity instead of softening. And, I talk about inside out mentorship, inside out leadership a lot is like, what do we really need? Like, what's coming out of our mouths that's causing this? And so if we could step back, start to slow down and say, hey, what would I need? Like, I remember I stepped into something new at when I was doing hospice recently, and I'm an older nurse, right? And I felt nervous and triggered. And this preceptor was awesome. She said, Todd, we got this. I'm here. And sometimes that's all people need. And because we're going through and our emotions and we're like triggered in some trauma-based stuff that creates this fight, flight, or freeze. And if we could understand that in ourselves, we could step into somebody else's world and walk alongside them. And it creates a better space for people to be open to learning. That's been my experience.
Totally, totally. I feel like this is also a conversation for leadership that's responsible for hiring new people in the department. Like hiring somebody in ER absolutely requires a baseline of skills. Like if you don't have some basic skills, then ER is probably not the best place for you to start. It's probably better off for like a lower acuity, maybe floor type scenario. And that's not a slam in any way to a new nurse. That's straight up saying, like, we want you to be successful here. And in order for you to be successful here, these are the minimum things that we require you to be competent and confident in. Right. And so I think it's a call all the way up for realizing, like, who are you hiring into the department? And are we hiring just because we're desperate and they have an RN behind their name or an LPN behind their name? Or are we truly hiring because we know that this person will serve the department? It's like such a huge conversation, because truly, if we are going to set our next generation up for success, then we have to look at it from all angles.
Totally agree. And the last thing I just wanted to share on that is like, I think, certain people need some resilience training. I do think, like, the one thing that I want to say is that the growth is on the other side of not quitting or not giving up. And our egos will take a hit. I use the term ego, but our self will take a hit. But if we could sit and breathe, I think at the end of the day, just breathe. It could slow that down so we could start to see it from a different perspective, and our need to be right, which is, hey, I'm right and you're wrong. When we're right, somebody else has to be wrong.
Right.
So this is just an open dialogue. Love to hear your thoughts on this for sure. I froze up, but it's on to you, Jess.
No, you're good. You're good. We could still hear you. So here's our sort of request of you. Like, come join our Facebook group. Come be part of the conversation, because like Todd and I don't have all the answers for sure. I mean, we're both in it from a perspective of recognizing that, like, we're like mid-career and we now have a huge responsibility to pass that baton to the next generation. And the next generation, like, I want you new nurses to know that you bring incredible value and insight and perspective and experience that we have never had. And we bring the same to the table. So in ways in which, like, we can teach you that resilience, like we can show you how to do those things, we can grow you in those ways. But it does require all of us to have hard conversations, to be open to one another, to release our attachment to being right or wrong, and to truly meet in the middle of saying, like, I have some really cool things that I could pass on to you in the profession. Todd, do you have the QR for our Facebook group that you could pop up there so they could join the conversation? And what we would really say is just come be part of the conversation. Let's figure out how to, like, create a bridge between us and the next generation so that we are passing nursing on to a badass next gen, right?
100%. Thank you so much